thread, we all feel that we wish we heard from more people of color on the community listening session, and younger people. Although I will say the young people that spoke last week were some of the best speakers we had. They were great, coming through with data and all kinds of stuff. So that was great. But knowing that we have 4 weeks to get to draft recommendations for the city manager and council, and knowing that we do want to hear from more people, just want to hear from people about how we might balance the two things. I know Robbie and Angela have already mentioned that they have video to share with the group that I can get, that Michelle is going to send over my way. We had talked about possibly sending people out to do like one-on-one, hi bud, one-on-one interviews with people. I told you she'd be here any second. To make sure that if there are people who are maybe shy talking in the group or shy being on YouTube, that they could have a one-on-one conversation with a committee member, and then we could report that back. Okay. And then there's also the option of, what are you doing? Okay. And then there's also the option of having another, this is
multitasking.
There's another option of having another listening session towards the end so that we have recommendations and then we share those out. Else we've got to go. So I'm going to mute myself and you guys discuss while I give my child a pop.
Well, I think Robbie and Angela had some really specific ideas that they mentioned to be proactive. I don't know if you guys wanted to elaborate on some of the wonderful ideas that you had mentioned. I know a lot of people had ideas, but you two had quite a lot.
Well, I just want to say, one of the ideas I had, was thinking about us moving kind of fast because we had not heard from the majority of we hadn't heard from any African American, Latinx community members, some who had been directly, had direct interaction with the police. And so, I know we wanted to hear from those people. So I knew that we already had some video from Coalition for Police Reform with a lot of those stories on the video, not a lot, but with a few stories. I also suggested that maybe we could go back for those who have not seen AJ Ali's documentary, Walking While Black. I love that documentary. I think it has a lot of good points in it. It has a lot of good, even one of our past chiefs is on the documentary. But I love particularly the Melvin Russell from Baltimore. That chief was really engaged with the community, and I thought that was very good. So I thought maybe we, visit those two videos along with Michelle Wittig, I think has sent in a 5-page report, and quite detailed. And I thought maybe we would look over her report, and she could come in and we could have Q&A and talk about a lot of the items that are in her report. I don't know, Angela, chime in. There were a few things that we talked about.
Yeah, just piggybacking off of what Robbie mentioned about Michelle and Robbie have done ride-alongs, right? So they've kind of had, oh, just Michelle. I'm sorry.
But Michelle, yeah.
Right. And so they, again, have that firsthand knowledge from a community perspective of what they've witnessed, what they've even heard on the police scanners, just different things, again, that start to reveal the culture that, maybe because if you're so into it that you become desensitized. And I say that as the police officers, if they hear this over and over again, you become desensitized, but fresh ears hear the implicit bias that's going on through there, the racial profiling. So they have that, again, they've witnessed it. And like she said, there's Michelle does have a lot of documentation on different things that we could look at and we could tackle, recommendations that they had previously, suggested through the Coalition for Police Reform that we'd still like to, bring to the forefront and continue working on, hopefully bring some progress through on. But like you mentioned, Nat, yeah, we have, we have a lot of things, but I think first and foremost, and this seems to be on the heart of everyone, the community as a whole, and then us, is the definite need for an oversight committee, like a civilian oversight committee that has power. We hear that throughout, and that's what we know we number one need. And I mean, everybody else can chime in, but I think that's like on the hearts of everyone, if I'm not correct.
Angela, with respect to Michelle's document, it's 2016, and you can look at that and see from a very well done document and where we are in 2020, and sort of use that as a yardstick to measure if we've accomplished anything, or any of her suggestions 2016 have been incorporated within the police department's policies now. I think that's a great idea to have her. You've got another person who's working with the city, Lisa, Karen Gunn. She's done some good writing, and she's sharp as a TAC PhD, the whole 9 yards. And I think she's working with you guys on a committee, Black Agenda, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So these are folks that would offer you some further insight, expand your minds on this topic.
Mm-hmm.
I'd also like to add our current parent groups at Virginia Avenue Park. We have, Familias Latinas Unidas, who can really share information, their experiences, either themselves or their children, with encounters with police, as well as PCG. And there's also the Ethiopian families as well, and one kind of encounters. And so I think there's an audience there that we can get information. And I know in a previous, I think in Rasika's previous comments or email, I don't recall exactly, but even the youth component, I think that's just as important. And I probably want her to expand a little bit more, because that she works directly with our youth resource team. And so I think that's valuable information, because we are working, or they're working with the most vulnerable youth in our community. And I'm sure there's a lot to share there that I think when the emails were sent, it's kind of keeping those things in mind as we work together, sort of develop ideas and strategies, because all of this is embedded and interweaved into their experiences. Rasika, I'm not sure if you wanted to add, not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. So we have been having offline group sessions with some of our youth, just because, after everything, all of the rioting and the protests started happening, there were a lot of feelings, rightfully so. And we wanted to give them a space to kind of start to debrief about it and talk about it and figure out what they wanted to do, because again, it's really important for our youth in our community to feel like they have some sort of power, or at least a voice in what's going on. I know quite a few of them actually applied for the committee when it came around. So those who did apply were glad they at least had someone that they knew on it. So I've been able to meet with them and get some of their ideas, so that their voices are being heard throughout this process. But it would be amazing to be able to hear directly from them if they felt comfortable. We've been talking, the YRT team, along with Liz and a few other people, Anahata, we've been talking about maybe getting them to send in, their stories, maybe via video, just like Angela and Robbie had said with their community, just so they felt a little more comfortable, maybe even a meeting where they could join in just to tell us or talk to us directly. So I think those are some of the things that would work really well for them. We've also just been trying to get them comfortable with the idea, because I know it is intimidating to be in front of all of you guys, and in front of the camera, in front of the community. So it's also just, it takes a level of courage and bravery to even share your story to anybody. especially stories that hit so close to home and that have affected them in such a way. So definitely giving more of them a larger space and a louder voice in this capacity would be amazing.
Let me.
So I saw Mark, Aaron, and Becky, and Angela, and Erica.
Just a couple of thoughts. I think for the moment, we have a few really good ideas about young people, and two thoughts on how we can try to get that facilitate that. One, I think this whole idea about intimidation, maybe there is a Zoom, but only 2 of us from the committee are on there with the kids were invited, and it could be transcribed and recorded. And I think that might be less intimidating. So that's one idea. And particularly someone they might know, like Rashika, somebody like that. Second thing is, at Samo High, they now have this Instagram page called Dear Samo High, which is an anonymous page. It was set up as they've started these conversations about racism. And it's an anonymous page where students can post their experiences. And I've read a lot of them. They're very moving. They're very honest. They really pull at your heart. I propose that whoever moderates that, we ask them to put out a call from us for stories about experiences with the police for young people of color. They actually submit them anonymously, and we can call them and read them out. And I think that might, the shyness factor and the intimidation factor, it's already a safe environment that we would work with. I'm sure we could find out through the administration who the moderator of that is.
Mark,
and that might be another way.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I actually already did that. So
great.
I reached out to her because we had the same idea.
Wonderful.
I figured that it was the easiest and safest way for people, not just YRT kids, but all youth in Santa Monica to reach out and get involved. So we're on the same page. And
they were open to doing a call for comments about interaction with the police.
Yeah. So what she said was, or I'm assuming she, again, we don't know who is the person who has it. The easiest way would to make an Instagram page so that we could have control of it, and it would be like the same anonymous format. That way, as time goes throughout all of our community meetings, people can still send in so that there's no like time limit, that they haven't missed anything. Their opportunity to speak and be heard is not missed, that it's like an ongoing thing. So I was already kind of in the process of doing that, and then just wanted to run it by you guys to make sure that it sounded like something that would be appropriate for us to do, just as a more ongoing and permanent, not solution but option for them.
So you're saying not to participate on the existing page, but to set up a new one. Yeah, got it. Great.
I just want to say that you mentioned the Walking While Black. I actually was interviewed in the film and traveled with it. And I want you to know that when we showed that film at Santa Monica High School, we didn't expect the response that we got from the youth. There was a line up the aisle on both sides to ask questions and to make comments. So the youth are definitely the answer to this, because if we can listen to what they're saying, we can hear it, and it will actually repeat itself no matter what city you're in. When I was in Baltimore, the same thing. The youth came forward and they wanted to talk. So they're there. Antonio, who is the principal at Samo High, he was just like, I didn't believe it would be like this. And the reason that they interviewed me in the film, I wasn't born in Santa Monica. I moved here. But what I learned was that there were children that were being taught to stay away from the police. Here I was a commissioner then. I had my grandkids with me and they were little. And they were asking me, Nana, is he your friend? Before they would even talk to him. And I asked them where they got that from. They got that from other kids who were taught not to talk to the police because the police were bad. That was basically the interview that I had in the film. And so in questioning our youth, we're going to get direct answers. And that's what we need.
Daryl, I know you've been waiting to talk. Do you want to go ahead?
Well, just briefly, I was reading the documents that you sent out, cars, evolution of cars and policing and unions. And I was musing because I was reading a publication called Born Suspect, 2014, published by the NAACP. It was amusing because all those evolutions of the car culture and rules had nothing to do with Black folks. I mean, all that rights, we never had those. I mean, even though they were established, it didn't apply to Black people. You know, search and seizure, it doesn't matter what is in place, did not happen. As far as the unions, we've had those on our radar for some time, and particularly with elections, and it gets kind of convoluted because it impacts the NCP and their relationships, and some people are too connected to politicians. So that's all a process. And then I'd just like to say, the last time I mentioned there's 4% African Americans in the city. Over half of those are new transplants. And the cases that we've had have primarily been people coming into the community and those new people. One was Ben Rings, the actor. And that was an issue of the white community weaponizing the police department. And fortunately, they recognized him. Faye Wells was another one. And we have a unique position of continuing to work with the police department, although unfortunately, I hate to use the term busted, but that's the term they use, in terms of what for a community organization, we're probably the one that's, for one, Michelle Wittig, you mentioned the ride along. Michelle Wittig said that she heard a statement that the police officers made, and they denied it categorically. But we had to come in and drill down and bust them out that was not, in fact, true, which unfortunately embarrassed the chief, Wendell, and everybody else. But they held to that story. So as I interviewed the police department and interviewed Michelle, we found the thread, and it unraveled. That in fact, the police did refer to a man as a big effing Black guy driving a Rolls Royce, which they denied saying. You know, we had the incidents where you talk about the youth not coming out, that still exists, but the city's been so good at being silent participants in gentrification. We don't have that many, the Black youth, when they were crying out, the city didn't listen. Now they're not there. You know, and now some go to school there because they live with their grandmothers or abuelas, but essentially the community that we were initially fighting for does not exist in that construct. So if we understand that, you know, the documents we sent out, it was good reading. I read all of it because I'm a historical major, but it had nothing to do with the Black experience. If you read, I don't know how many got a chance to read Cars and Police and the Evolution of that. Anyone get a chance to read any of it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So
Part of it.
Yeah, so I was reading through it and I said, wow, even back to my great uncle George, who was bootlegging in the late 20s, this had nothing to do with them in terms of what is fair, what is not constitutional. The Constitution does not apply. In practice, it didn't apply to Black folks, even to this day. And that's why we're here right at this time. So I was just wanted to, make that clarity, because a lot of the youth still aren't willing to speak out. We heard, I think, I'm sure Robbie was around, and Becky, the Latino and African-American young men especially were upset about the police stops. that they were accusing him of, what are you doing? You're a drug addict or a drug dealer or whatever they would like to say. And categorically, the police department denied it. And so I don't know if you know it, we came from Colorado and Berkeley, which we originally lived in Virginia. And so they pulled my son and nephew over, and they did the same thing to them. The difference was that I had them come forward, and you know, Becky, you remember we had 3 meetings, huge meetings at Calvary, for them to come out and speak to these issues because they had to do it. They had to speak. I explained to them they had to speak because the other Black and brown men, young men, had no voice. And technically, whether you like it or not, when they pulled them over, the officer didn't realize, although they're African American, but they essentially pulled over 2 white boys who were connected. The reason they don't bother white children and men is because they know they're connected some way. The officer never expected to be in front of the chief or anything else. This is why they had to speak up. And we haven't heard as much probably because the population has fallen off. I'm sure some of it's still there and some of the families had histories, of course. That's one of the things we're working with. So just to be mindful if we move forward, one of our positions is to make sure the new culture of African Americans who are moving in, they're professionals, some work in the State Attorney General's office downtown LA, that they're treated with a accord of respect for being here. And the few that are coming in, you know, Santa Monica exists on tax dollars. So you have that 4% swell to maybe 12% because Black people are coming in, buying things. And one thing I will say about the police department, because we measure based on a reoccurrence. So when they had the issue with the Nike store last year, where the white female manager accused the Black guy of stealing, those 2 officers, because of our pressure, they did what they're supposed to do. They approached the guy and said, "Do you have a receipt?" And they said, "We're out of it." And the guy and his son were validated. He cussed the manager out, but they could do nothing about that. That was a far cry from when, and this caused consternation in the community because a Black architect, there's a case we had to resolve because of this police, weaponizing police department, 2 store owners. And this caused, Nat was there, you know, this caused a lot of consternation in our HRC because the store owners happen to be Jewish. And the African American, the architect said, well, you know, I bought this jewelry because I went to Israel and I liked that jewelry. So that's why he went there. So he went to both stores and one of the Jewish store owners called the police on him and said, hey, he's robbing the store. And while the police had him sitting out there in his nice clothes next to his Jaguar and everything else on the ground, the one that sold him the equipment, the jewelry, would not come and advocate, hey, that was my customer. Even though the one across the street said, I called them. The other problem was the police department. They treated him like a criminal, although they could have asked him, let's see your bag, show us a receipt, and you're good. So from that incident to last year, we saw the needle move because, you know, we asked the department to do the intervention before they go criminalizing Black folks. So those are the kind of things that we measure as an NAACP. We're Santa Monica and Venice, so, you know, we have to work with the chief of police, Santa Monica, LA, Santa Monica. We've had interventions in Long Beach with the chief and Culver City. We need to look at structurally, we know what's going on. I know it's nice to hear from young people. If we can get them, fine. But we know what's going on because of the cases we've had to adjudicate within the department. Even to the point, Robbie knows that we had to we forced the police department to take all police reports and not to dissuade them from taking police reports. And now I send people down there, and if they I won't go with them. As long as they say they got the report done, fine. If they don't get it, that's a ding. And one time they did get dinged for that was we sent a Italian guy that they roughed up, they beat up in Santa Monica Hospital, St. John's. And Santa Monica PD assured us that they would take his report, which they did not do, which ended up in a big fiasco. And they beat this guy up because they thought he was skinhead, where in fact, he was a cancer patient. That's why he was skinny and hell, whatever. So those are the kind of things that on the ground that we do. And we're measuring the different, I read some things with Michelle. I want to talk to her offline about her report. But there's some things in there that we do on a practical and we've done methodically to change the dynamics of people who look, even the ones that don't look African American, you know.
Would you share any literature with the group from some of the things that you've done? I think it's really important that you guys have been working on that.
Okay.
If you could share even summary reports or anything.
I'll share a summary of what
you all have that.
What we've done in conjunction with the city and the agencies we supported in the city and the agencies we didn't for a number of reasons. But we've always given each agency an opportunity to work. And when they show that they're not in accordance with everyone being equal, then we've pulled back. So I'll share those narratives with you so you know that when I'm listening, I'm thinking a little bit different probably than where you're going.
That'd be great. Thank you. We would love to read some of those.
That would be great. Erica's been waiting, and then Darnell too.
Hello, everybody. Daryl, thank you so much. It's good to hear some historical perspective on what we're talking about. You know, I've heard the concerns of a lot of the committee members that this process is seeming really rushed and that we're not hearing from the community. And yet what I'm hearing from members of the community is that you have seen the needle move, and you see it with the Nike store incident, that the needle does move, but it requires work and it requires listening. And I know that both Darnell and I are feeling like we also haven't had an opportunity to really hear from people, that we are rushing a process, and it violates something that's core to our police department's beliefs, which are the tenets of procedural justice, that in order to have a legitimate process, you have to be fair, you have to be transparent, and you have to provide an opportunity for voice. And regardless of the deliverables that we managed to bring to the council in 4 weeks, none of them are going to be worth much if the process that we take to get there is not legitimized by giving enough people an opportunity to be heard in whatever forum they're comfortable being heard. And for us to shortcut that process and not give it an opportunity, like, I'm not sure that we're going to see what we need to see. And just in addition, as one of the two police department members of this committee, it's also really important that you hear from police officers and that they are able to speak to you and have a conversation with you, and we can talk about those things, because we're not going to see systemic change unless the people that you are trying to change are part of that process. And, you know, so far we've been very quiet because we want to do more listening than we do to be heard at this moment. But at some point, you know, that we need to get police department personnel to you so that we can discuss these things, because, you know, otherwise they're feeling like this committee is just making decisions about them without even giving them an opportunity to be part of that discussion, not to defend, but just to really truly understand how we can change our behavior so that our community feels like we are truly reflecting what it is that the community wants from us. Because, you know, the police are nothing more and nothing less than a reflection of the community that they serve. And unless we can truly understand what that is, And that requires work, and it requires dialogue, and it requires all kinds of other things, transparency. And then anything that we do here is going to be a fraction of what it possibly could be. And I see the potential, and I see how excited everyone is about making lasting, significant changes. But we're not going to do that if we cut down our opportunities to actually have the people that we need to hear from be heard. And I just hope that as we're going through this process and we're trying to calendar out as many listening opportunities as possible, that not only do we give our youth a chance to speak, but that you can also hear from some of the civilians that work in our department, our Department of Mental Health clinicians, that you can hear from people that work on our juvenile diversion program and some of these other things. And so again, just hoping that you'll give us a chance to do that. And again, just thanking you for that opportunity.
Thanks, Erica. Darnell, and then Angela.
Thank you. I just kind of wanted to echo what a lot of us have already been saying on the side, as far as feeling like it has been rushed. It feels like it's being rushed, and we haven't heard from the people that we want to hear from, the people that this committee is gauged towards. And as we were over the weekend, as we were talking, actually today I ran into 2 kids from the PAL, and I think that it's very important that we not only hear from the people in the community who've had negative interactions with the police department, but also PAL. I've been very transparent with everyone here, even people in my department, that I didn't grow up pro-police. I didn't trust the police until I was about 18 and 19 years old. And part of the reason is because I was actually able to have interactions with police officers who made me change my perspective, and they made me feel welcomed. And I think a lot of our kids on PAL, and I've done a few things with PAL as far as Big Bear and things like that. Most of them are African American and Hispanic kids. I think that those are also people we need to hear from to see what works, because undoubtedly there's things that need to be changed. Santa Monica, I think, is a great city, but we have room for improvement. And I think there's a lot of things that we do that's good. And hopefully we can reach out to some of the kids from PAL to see what's working for them, what's not working for them, to see how we can really bridge the gap between the community and our youth. And secondly, Daryl, you made like a great point regarding the Nike store, and Erica, you touched on it as well. And a lot of it does have to do with the pressure that the community has put on policing in general. And a lot of it has to do with training. In Santa Monica, we do a lot of implicit bias. We do a lot of things behind the scenes and things that we have to do quarterly and required to do. And I think all of that is the reason why what happened in the Nike store happened, because we're actually working towards these goals. So I'm glad that we're all on the same page and actually working towards some of these things.
Thank you. I just want to say, I know Angela wants to speak, Mike wants to speak, and Nat. And then the other thing that I just wanted to put into this conversation is when I got asked to lead this and set up a process, I set up a process with 23 meetings. I had weekly meetings for you guys plus bonus meetings with the community. So I don't want anyone to think that I think 6 weeks is like enough time. I don't, right? But what I'm hopeful is that 6 months is enough time to set up some processes for after the 8th. And the only reason that besides that I don't get to decide this, but the only reason why I've come around to this time frame is because of the money thing. Like the thing about moving money, that's October or it's June. And so if we can even get to the conversation, get to the areas that we think we need to be moving money around, just to create space around that is really important to do before October, because June 2021 is like a different world at this point, right? Like that's really far away. So I think as we're thinking about this, and I think too, even the community processes, right? Like, I mean, I don't know how many of you have interacted with the Office of Wellbeing. Like all we did was community engagement. That's what we did. We probably did too much of it and didn't deliver enough, to be honest. Like, because we really wanted to make sure we heard from everybody. So I just am kind of coming at this from the idea of like, what is a really strong starting gate that we can put the city at on September 8th, right? And then there's going to be so much that needs to happen after this for it to be real, right? I don't think anybody is like thinking we'll hand over the document and then, you know, I won't let the communications department be like, police reform achieved September 8th council meeting, right? We don't want to spin it like that. We want to spin it like this is the first step of a long process. So when I hear stuff even about the civilian oversight, I know that's come up a lot of times, right? Those are things that are not a one thing, right? That's a process that we're setting up. So I just wanted to jump in and say that just because, you know, I wish I could send you guys my original schedule. They were like, this is way too many meetings. This is too much of a commitment for these people. You can't make them do this. So it's all, we're just trying to find a balance right now. Sorry. So Angela, Mark, Mike, and then Nat.
Okay, thank you. I kind of wanted to circle back a little bit to what Darnell and both Rasika was saying as far as listening from our youth. I think, you know, as we do start to, however that safe space is created, in that we should look as far as what their recommendations are, right? What they believe would be our next steps as far as how do we make it safer for them, you know, in the community as a whole. You know, what are the engagement things we do with, you know, with them? And Robbie and I kind of listed that as far as, are we going to do softball games and basketball games between the police and the community? You know, what kind of things? But at the same time, there must be restorative justice that takes place. There must be conversations of healing, because there's going to be a lot of feelings. And Liz, I'm sure you can speak on that. There's going to be a lot of feelings of anger, frustration, confusion. There's going to be a lot of feelings going on as people start to recall these incidences that have occurred in the past and presently. And we must create some form of healing and restoration between the police community and between us as a whole, you know, because that's what the positivity has to be moving forward. And we don't want to have those conversations, like say with the youth, where, okay, they spilled their guts, but then what? Because now they're way up here with all of these feelings and no way to resolve them, right? So we have to make sure we're mindful of that when we create that space for them. And that's all I have.
You got your mute. You're muted. I'm not next.
You mute.
Sorry, I think I was next. Can you guys hear me?
Thank you.
So Lisa, I'm glad you addressed the conversation about the budget, because I went back and looked at the original email when we were selected for the committee and why it was such a short time frame. And it was September 8th is the last meeting before October when they made those decisions. And I spent a lot of time in the budget leading up to this to try and, you know, get a good sense of, you know, where things were at and, you know, why the police budget wasn't cut a penny, why it was slightly increased, whereas community service was cut by 21% and the library was cut by 37%. And so, you know, the list of, you know, issues that you sent out quickly in the email and mentioned that more could be added, I didn't see budget, you know, on there. And so I just want to make sure that that gets, you know, it's time to speak about. And then I think it was at the end of the first meeting, Daryl mentioned kind of the elephant in the room being the police union. And I just wanted to make sure that there were some conversations that could be had around that and just kind of get more information as to when are negotiations happening, if they're happening now, what are the main, you know, points, and if we can have any input there. And so, you know, again, just trying to drive towards that September 8th date with the things that the people who our audience is going to be is the city council, and what are the things that, you know, that we have influence over them. Just want to make sure that those get added.
Thank you. I definitely wrote those both down. Nat and then Mark.
Yes, I just want to emphasize something Erica said that's important. The police department is a reflection of your community. And I want you folks to know I've been here since 1949, and I have been an integral part of that police department. I've gone through stuff you guys described before I got there. I was in Santa Monica High School, and my life was interracial. I associated with all the blacks, the Latinos, everybody, and so as a senior, I was student body president. I probably told you this story, and we went over to Beverly Hills. 3 of my buddies from a synagogue. I used to go to synagogue. I went to Baptist church. My wife tells me today I went to all these religious institutions to see the girls. But the point I'm getting at, I went to synagogue at 19th in California with my buddies, and we went to, and I'll make this brief, we went to a bar mitzvah in Beverly Hills, picked up 3 beautiful young ladies, brought them back to Santa Monica, and parked at a very nice view spot at Berkeley and Wilshire. It's Franklin and Wilshire, actually. There's a water tower, big one. Pulled in on the gravel. Curfew's 10 o'clock. And we're sitting there talking. No beer, no booze, no nothing, no hands on the ladies. We're just talking. We just got there. And the spotlight's on my face. I mean, like I'm on stage at Barnum Hall. And the police officer came over to the window and says, "Who is that?" This is 1952. Okay. And my buddy who's driving the car, his daddy was the vice mayor of Santa Monica. He said, that's my buddy. He's student body president. We just come from Beverly Hills. We're all friends. We just got here. We just pulled up. You can touch the hood. The car's hot. We haven't been here. They took us all to SMPD, the old building, the old police department. And my parents were involved in PTA, very well known about the PTA. The other guy, third guy, was a jewelry store owner. I'm only giving you this example because I want you to see the scale of where we come from. Daryl told a story about Montana Avenue. See, I know the town. I was the first African-American police officer in Santa Monica to write a white person a ticket. That's a fact. That's in the record, okay? And why did I get on the police department? That experience on the Berkeley Hill said to me as a young man, I've been a leader all my life. I got to get in there and change that police department, okay? I got in that police department in 1958. I was voted 3 years as a rookie in the police department, president of the POA, and was president for 5 years. And we did stuff in those days that I think you should think about today. I drove my car into what was 21st and Olympic, which was all Latino. All my buddies. I pull up the car and we go and have lunch at 10-7, 10-12 out at such and such a place. Got to know the community. I worked Ocean Park, walked the beat, got to know the community, and people call me by name. Fast forward to 71. The only thing I'd ever been was a cop, right? I got elected to the city council, highest vote on that city council. So Erica, what I'm trying to say is how I treated people as a police officer. I can get you kids now, the grandkids of people in Venice, California, who would say that I saved their butt. I had more cousins than any black person in the history of California, because anytime they got stopped in Santa Monica and said, Nat Travis is my cousin. Those are true stories, and I only give it to you to reflect. We've got a long way to go, but I've come a long way, and I've seen this, and all I'm here for is to try to help you. I was chairman of the California Peace Officers Standards Commission. You know, I've done this work. I worked as a special master at a federal court for overseeing San Francisco Police Department for 20 years. We have problems. And I think this group I'm with here is one of the best groups. I know most of you. And we're going to make sure we leave in this short period that Lisa's given us and make some accomplishment. But my suggestion to the union president is get involved publicly and let the public and the world know you're interested in making your police department an even better police department, and you will make some major points. If you stay silent and let the town that you live in, that you reflected on, this town is not as sacred as you might think it would be. It's known internationally as a progressive town. But I could give you history on how blacks have been treated up the ladder stuff. And see, even right now, we brag about, Mark's looking at me, we brag about black. President of Santa Monica College is black. Principal of Samo High is black. Oh, we beat the drum. But what goes on underneath that? Thank you, folks, for listening. Mark, I'm sorry. Is it Shuli?
Who's next,
I think
Lisa?
Mark was ahead. I think Mark was ahead.
Thank you. I really did appreciate all the history. I think we have to be pragmatic right now. We have to do more than one thing at a time. So in an ideal world, the ideal world would be spend a long time getting lots of input, and these are not mutually exclusive. We get data. We talk to as many constituents as we can. And we want to do that. But at the same time, I'd suggest that we do two things while we're doing that. One would be that we set up a small group focused on use of force. We already know that there are some blueprints for that. There's the mayor's pledge. There's a can't wait. There are other sources, not exclusively those. And I suggest that one small group starts going through the various options there with those and starts pulling together use of force. Because I think use of force is a groundswell that we will need to do something about. What that is yet, we don't know. So I'd suggest that. The second thing we can do, in addition to use of force and gathering all this information and data, is what Lisa said about the budget. That's our biggest time constraint. And if we boil it down, and I'm going to oversimplify because I'm a pragmatist and we only have a limited amount of time, at least in this first phase, on very complex issues. On the budget stuff, when you think of budget, of how to tackle in a short amount of time, budgetary opportunities, in other words, I heard Lane use the words not defund, but to divest and invest, how you allocate some of the duties. So there is that big one, that big bucket of duties that may not be done by sworn officers who are highly specialized, highly trained, highly paid, all for good reason, and could be done by other people. And what savings might come from that. Now, that's highly complex, and I'm not expert at it. I think people on this screen are much more expert than I am. That's certainly one way to look at the budget, possibly cut it. Another is, and this is one that I feel strongly about, Santa Monica has military surplus vehicles. Part of the use of force discussion is about divesting military surplus vehicles from municipal police departments. And with that comes maintenance budgets, comes staffing, comes training, comes all the other things that's around that bucket of stuff about money. And then the other bucket obviously is staffing and processes involving staffing within the police department. Again, highly complex. I, for one, have no expertise. But I think if we start looking at what are these buckets that we could start examining that have budgetary implications and set a small group on that, set a small group on use of force, and maybe a couple of other small groups to work simultaneously as we continue to get inputs, is the only way we can, and do these things simultaneously, is the only way we'll have some stuff that we're proud of that's legitimately based upon our inputs, data, and both people, that we can at least have some constructive, thought through comments to make and recommendations to make at that first phase in September.
Julie, and then Erica, and then Daryl.
Hi, so I totally am in favor of creating all the processes we need to hear from all the people we need to hear from. Maybe even at some point, and this could come even after our recommendations or be part of our recommendations, but like a community survey of not what people's experiences are, but what they think they need to make their community a more loving, thriving, place of wellness. And that's like the invest part, I think, of what you were saying, Mark. We don't know how much we could divest until we know what we want to invest in. So I would love to be part of that conversation of creating, and part of that can be like creating a civilian oversight commission, right? Like investing in things like that. So I would say, in addition to the 2 work groups you mentioned, Mark, like the use of force and like a divest invest, although that might be too big, but like something around like a civilian oversight, like maybe a subcommittee.
Sure.
I did hear somewhere, which was new to me, that other civilian oversight commissions have not been successful, or like, I want to learn more about that. I don't know about that. So, oh, perfect. I'm seeing Robbie say. So yeah, so those are a couple of things that I would say like could be like kind of directions for this group. I would like to keep meeting as a whole group, because I really am appreciating just hearing the stories and people's different experiences. I think that's going to help us work together better to stay connected like that. And I think we could also do some small group meetings. That's where I vote we move next.
Thank you. So I saw Erica, Daryl, and Nat, but I wanted to let Rolinda skip the line because she hasn't said anything yet.
Well, I put something in the chat about I know the big narrative is to be able to hear from as many like constituencies as possible. And I was just thinking, in addition to what Mark mentioned about the 2 small groups for the budget and for
use of
force, that we also think about like what each of us like represents in this community, in this committee, and how we can hear from the constituencies that we're advocating for, and create a framework to do that. So I think like in this call too, it might be helpful to just brainstorm like, who are the constituencies that we need to hear from, and who's going to get those voices, and also like what is a fair framework to gather those. So it's going to be, of course, different for the youth. You're going to go to Instagram and social media, and then we talked about the Black community, which may mean the church or someplace else or some other type of setup. But I just think if we could leave this call like being able to move and get those voices as soon as possible, then they can help like validate some of the other things that are coming down the line that we're coming up with our own research and reviewing the budget, et cetera. And I also wanted to ask, because I didn't see it come through, if that budget breakdown was available for us to see, how like the department is using their time and like what those line items are, so we can just kind of get, and I mean, that's going to be important.
Yeah, I have put the request over to the police department, and they have said that they're going to get us numbers. They didn't give me a date by when they would get those numbers, so I'll follow up again and just, I'm a big fan of arbitrary deadlines, and just say we need it by X day, and see if we can get it moved forward. Because I know like the budget document that the city produces is really big, but if you try to get a lot of information, you actually can't get a lot of information.
It doesn't have any of that. What Lane said, it doesn't have any detail. It's just it's just $100 million basically.
Yeah. So I did put that request out, and I'm updating that spreadsheet. I added a tab with all the questions I've gotten and all the responses I've gotten from the departments, and I'm just going to keep, that's part of my job on this committee is nagging people. So I'm just going to keep nagging them and see how much information I can get. I do know from previous processes, there was a budget task force before this one, and they had a hard time getting some of that information. So I'm not 100% certain that we'll get those details, in which case we just swing for the fences, I think, and make them provide the details to explain why they can't do the thing. But hopefully we'll just get the information that we need and be able to make things that are grounded in what those line items are. But I will definitely keep asking for them. There was still Daryl and Nat. And then I wanted to see if after these two comments, we could go to, we kind of got into part of the agenda around the working groups. And, oh, sorry, and two more, Daryl, Nat, Darnell, Erica. And then we can talk about, and maybe I can move it up a little bit, just the expert presentations that people have been reaching out and offering to us, and then some that have been chased down by me to see if they might be useful, and then talk about a strategy for that. So it's Daryl, Nat, Darnell, Erica, and then Lisa.
You know, in relation to the time frame, we're also, our LA half, we're dealing with LAPD. You know, they set aside $150 million. That's how much money they're dealing with. I mean, their budget's a 1.1 billion or something for the police department. And the challenge I had was that everyone's running, chasing the money and not really focusing on what's going to be the outcome. So what we, to the chagrin of some of my other presidents, we're looking at what the police department is doing right and doing that they need help in, so that we can fine tune it. And I think that might be the concern here. We know Santa Monica PD is doing some good things. At least I've seen it. So maybe stepping out on faith, they can share with us things that they need help with, and maybe we can share with them things we perceive they may help with, so that we can fine tune in a 6-week period. We got to fine tune where we want these efforts to be. You know, for example, I know everyone knows how to give a speeding ticket. Okay, so we're not dealing with that. But what areas can maybe, in the spirit of community, they can share with, say, well, we need more help with these issues, right? Or we can say we need more help with these, or they can share with us what they do operationally, and then we can say, well, that's how we are impacted by it, so that we can make a informed opinion about it. Use of force is something different. I mean, I get an example last week. If that Virginia Park incident had been with a very destructive person, it could have escalated way further than it went, you know, with the techniques the officers use. So it may be something, use of force and training, but it's something we can look at. How do we want to be managed? You know, in terms of when the officer so to that end, I think that if we are able to look at where the concerns are, and then we can put fundings in that area to help mitigate what's going on. I think that's the only, in this short period of time, I think that's the only thing, since we don't have a lot of time to do a big study, we've got to work with each other and be honest with what we're feeling, what the department says, what they're feeling, their needs, and we can probably help each other. And I think and then we can go and say, we need a budget to fund, this is the impact we want to make. That's it.
Thank you. Nat, Darnell, Erica, and then Lisa.
Darnell, mine's really quick. I echoed Daryl, and I repeat my little formula that I had in the first meeting, I believe, the 3 T's. Tell the truth, be transparent, and you'll gain the trust. And I totally believe that we should have police at the round table discussing how they are going to implement change, or they recommend how they're going to implement change. If I were sitting in Erica's seat today, when I got the list, Black agenda, that the council voted 6-0 on, or 0, I think it was 6-0 unanimous, I would have grabbed that thing and called for executive committee of the union and said, hey, either if their mindset was trouble's coming down the road, I said, you ain't seen no trouble. If we don't get in here and get out front of it, get out front of it. Don't let the community run over you, get out front of it, because we have to work together. The only success I've had in this life is being a mediator. You ever heard of a consent decree? I ran one. 19 different parties, they hated each other. We got them together and got stuff passed. First woman on a on a police cavalry unit in the history of a city. All those kind of first came out of it. And I believe that these two representatives of the police departments are good people. And so let's get together and just echoing Daryl. Go ahead next. Darnell, I guess.
Darnell.
Thank you. Absolutely. I feel like this meeting already, we're bouncing out a lot of good ideas and it's feeling very productive. And something that I don't remember who said it, but something that I really want to touch on is us really focusing on our city of Santa Monica. I think a lot of times, and I'm guilty of it as well, because I've felt at times, back in New York, I've been profiled. And I think a lot of times we look at what's going on nationally and not what's going on directly in our city. And I think that's important. As I'm looking at the numbers and we're talking about what we can certainly improve on and what we're doing good at, just to throw out numbers, as far as Santa Monica, the last 3 years, only 4% of our arrests resulted in use of force, which I think we can attribute that to our officers, to de-escalation and the trainings that we do. Or the last 10 years, we've only had 9 officer-involved shootings, 6 of which the suspects were armed, actively shooting or stabbing someone. So I think that also speaks for our city. So when we start looking at and talking about use of force, look at what is working for our use of force as well, and some things that maybe we feel like can be adjusted or there can be a conversation that can be had. And secondly, and I think that Lisa, you're going to start talking about when we start talking about these presentations, I think we need to have experts talk about some of the things. A big thing that I've been hearing is about our Bearcat, which many people are referring to as a military tank, which, I mean, if I wasn't law enforcement, I would think exactly that's what it is, a tank. But it does have its place. When we look at our city being a soft target and we look at what happened in Vegas, that Vegas shooter had Santa Monica on his list. And at times like that, you don't need something until you need it. And I think we also have to, as many people may be opposed to some of the military things, we also have to look at why we would need it to protect our city and just look at those kind of things in the totality. So I think we're definitely going in the right place. And I think that we're bouncing a lot of good ideas around.
Thank you, Erica, and then me, and then Rolinda again.
I wanted to just touch on the idea of having these breakout committees for use of force and for budget. I think Lisa can attest to the willingness and the excitement within our department to be able to come to members of this commission and be able to talk about what it is that we do on a day-to-day basis, what our programs are intended for, what their purpose is. And we're also very, very cognizant in the police department that the lane that police have been expected to travel in Santa Monica over the years has gotten much more, it's much broader than when Nat was on the force. We've been asked to, over the years, to take on a lot of responsibilities, especially related to homelessness and mental health issues that were never the intended purpose of a police department. And it's things that our community has asked us to step in order to help solve some of the problems related to those things. And there are also things that we acknowledge are not our core purpose, and that we would like to be able to talk to this committee about how to respond to those things differently and possibly be able to divert a lot of that response away from the police department for many different reasons. And we are absolutely, I think somebody made the comment in the public comment about how police are the concierge service of the city. And none of us want to be that. That is 100% not what we signed up for. But we do it because we are the people who answer the phone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we want to solve problems for our community members. But they are definitely things that we would like to bring people from our department in who work specifically on these issues to be able to explain to you what it is that we're doing, and we can work collaboratively to figure out ways to divert that work to people who may be better able to handle it, and that our community would like that response better because it would reflect the values of the people who live in Santa Monica. And we are so excited to start that conversation, which is why it's been kind of frustrating that we haven't been able to do it so far, because a lot of the questions that you have been bringing up are all things that we are not trying to avoid. In fact, it's quite the opposite, that these are all things that we would like to talk about, and really truly be transparent and tell the truth, because that is the only way that we're actually going to see some meaningful change. And I really want us to prioritize bringing in those folks from our department who can answer these questions for you, as people with experience, as we call them, boots on the ground. So.
Thank you. So I am a born researcher. That's what I do all day. Personal life, you asked me a question, I don't know the answer. I'm learning about it for the next 3 days. Work life is obviously the same. And so part of what I really wanted people to see was that, you know, a lot of cities have already decided what they're going to do. And I think we can learn a lot from those other cities. So I wasn't collecting the examples from all the other places to say, like, don't think for yourselves, but I think there are ideas that people have advanced already that would be really impactful for Santa Monica. I would love to have some people, especially from PD, kind of go through that list of things and let us know, like, what our city's already doing that those cities have already done, because I haven't cross-checked all of it to see, you know, I've cross-checked our city against 8 Can't Wait, so I know the things that we don't do on that list. But as far as the other cities and the things they're doing, you know, people are like really going for it out there. So like in San Francisco, they're saying the police are no longer responding to calls for non-criminal activity of any kind, right? So if it's a neighbor to neighbor dispute, they're not going. If it's about homeless people, they're not going. There's a bunch of things that they're just not going to send the police to anymore. And there's a lot out there. So I would really like to have the opportunity for police, since these are all police reforms primarily, to just look at that sheet and let me know, like, even from like easy, medium, hard, right? Like if we don't do those things, would it be an easy switch? Would it be a medium like work effort, or would it be something where you would really have to change a lot of things? I think that would be really helpful, just because people did start this conversation before us, and we should leverage that instead of starting from scratch. And then the other thing is just all the people that have reached out that want to talk to this group. So there's Coalition on Police Reform, that's Michelle, and she was originally going to be a speaker in the listening session that we had last week. But then we decided, you know, 2 hours isn't even long enough for a listening session. We shouldn't be adding speakers to that time. So she's still on deck to talk to the group. 2 police officers from Santa Monica Police Department that people from all over the community were saying you have to talk to these 2 people, which is Roy Brown and Rudy Flores. People really want us to hear from them. So I would like this group to hear what they have to say. Representatives from the Department of Mental Health who partner with the police department on some of their work, I think they would have a lot to say. There's an organization called Californians for Safety and Justice, and there's a woman in particular, Marissa Aruna, and she's worked with several police departments to bring about reforms and has some good insights about, you know, what's the challenges, where are you going to run up against unions, where it seems like it's easy but it's not, that type of stuff. She might be a good speaker to hear from. And then the Stockton Mayor's Office, they've got someone there, Max Vargas, and they, because they didn't have any money, made a lot of changes because they didn't have any money. But in doing so, they ended up transforming their approach to policing in a way that is generally perceived as a positive impact, right? So if they could do that with no money, like less money, those are changes we could probably make with the same amount of money, right? So even if we're not able to cut a ton of money, I think those are people to hear from. And then tonight, we also talked about Karen Gunn, hearing from the parent groups, hearing from the youth resource, YRT teams, the juvenile diversion program, and Cal Youth. So what I want to know is if we think it might make sense to, because we're doing this in Zoom, it's like the one great aspect of Zoom is that we can record any of these Zooms, right? So I don't think the whole committee needs to be in all the conversations. I think if we can do these conversations and whoever can come, and we can record it and the rest of the group can see the conversation, then we could probably hear from almost all those people within the next week or week and a half, right? I could definitely dedicate a bunch of time to making sure we're setting up calls and making sure you guys can all join. And I think that would be such a great influx of context and background and best practices and everything else. And then because they would be recorded, we could all share it. So that was the thing that I wanted to say. And then I forgot who's next. I think it's Angela and then Mike.
Thank you. Just wanted to kind of piggyback on Erica and Lisa. And Erica, I'm so happy to hear you say that you guys know that you don't necessarily want to address, the domestic violence issues and homelessness, but instead would like to see more mental health professionals and, social workers and things like that. Because at the end of the day, we know that that's really where that place is coming from. We know there's some type of mental health issues that are involved in homelessness and in domestic abuse. And I know that was one of the recommendations that Robbie and I also had on there, was to create like a civilian community safety patrol, right? That had the emergency medical tech on there, the mental health professional, the social worker, and the skilled mediator, right? And those were the ones who would go and handle those diversified 911 calls that were not necessarily, they were non-risk. And so that makes sense that you would say that. And at the same time, that's something that I think we should really consider, because again, that cuts down the use of you guys being over here when it's not necessarily useful or productive in a sense. And like I said, and at the same time too, we know that there's some mental health issues that are going on in that term and those issues. So again, and thank you, Lisa, because I think that's, there is important that we listen to all these different constituencies and even the youth, right? Even all of these spaces, because that helps us to better gauge and, get the quote unquote analytics that we're getting from each of these constituencies, especially the ones who have programs that are working, because that helps us with our own blueprint. You take from here, put into there and see how that works. So again, I'm excited and I look forward to continuing this.
Mike, Robbie, and then Becky.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. We had somebody from community services on the first call that we had, and maybe it's my fault for not asking the question, but their budget is getting cut by $6 million. And while they talked about the services that they're still able to provide, I would love to hear more about what got cut. And if, because, it's a finite resource, and the fact that the police department didn't get cut, I look at it as the police department took some of those resources from the community services department. And so I would love to hear, if that was more proportionate, if everybody got cut by 10%, and I know that there's a lot of impediments to that happening, what are the things that would be able to bring back where we don't have to brainstorm hard because we had them last year and all we have to do is provide them the funding to bring them back. So if there's potential, again, where not everybody has to join, but we could hear from community services, I'd love to hear that.
They definitely want to talk to the group again. I can definitely set that
up. So one of the things that I wanted to bring up or circle back to is what when Angela, I think it was Angela, was talking about healing. Over the conversations of the emails that we had been sending back and forth, Liz had put a quote in one of her emails. I think it was Cheryl Richardson or whatever, but it spoke about you can't heal if you haven't been hurt or something like that. I'm paraphrasing, but because I'm not looking at it right now, but people want to be heard so that they can heal. And I usually say, you have to bring it up to get it out and, get it out in the open. But what happened, with Coalition for Police Reform, as you guys have heard, has been doing a lot of this work for maybe 5 or 6, probably over 6 years now. And I was one of the ones that helped to author a program well, we thought it was going to be a program, but African American Community Academy on Policing, because we know that the police academy, you know, you can go to the police academy and find out all about what the police do. And we just felt like they needed to come to the community and find out about our community and what we do, and hear some of those stories. We had it all set up where we would bring in the professors from Santa Monica College who would also facilitate part of that as far as roundtables and even do some role playing and that sort of thing. But kind of the response that we were getting, even though Chief Jacqueline did approve it, and they did do part of it, which was, of course, the tour of Black Santa Monica, but it was never really rolled out for the community. And so we got pushback on it because what we were hearing from the lieutenants were that, you know, although the new recruits were eager to do whatever it took, but some of the veterans did not want to hear from the community because maybe they felt like the community was going to yell at them and they were going to accuse them of things. And after all, they did not do it, you know, especially some of the good cops. And so I look at that as the same as, you know, when we're talking about racism, you know, there's a lot of people, you know, some, you know, white friends that want to say, well, I don't want to hear that because I didn't do it. You know, I didn't create racism. I didn't do that I didn't do slavery. I wasn't even born then. But the point is, it happened. And so in order, and it's what it represents. So to me, you have to have the police listen to the community and take some of those hits. You know, they didn't do it, but it's such thing as saying, I'm sorry that happened to you. You know, I didn't do it, but it doesn't matter. I'm sorry it happened to you. I hear you. How can we move forward? So not wanting to hear those stories. And I'm not saying the officers that are on here today, they're wonderful officers. One came with a real high recommendation from a past lieutenant. But the point is, there are officers out there that have hurt and offended people, and the community wants them to hear those stories so that we can start to heal. Because as long as the hand keeps going up, we don't want to hear that because we didn't do that. We're always going to have this issue.
Becky was next.
So what I want to say is that it's not impossible to train the police in different modes. And I know that because as co-chair of the Commission on the Status of Women in 2014, what I did with Chief Jackie and the whole Santa Monica police force was retrained because of what I was doing. I was working with women and children in domestic violence. The whole police force was retrained in Start by Believing. When I left the commission, Mayor Garcetti's group pulled me in because of the Start by Believing. It has taken me 3 years to convince them that they need to be retrained for the Start by Believing at LAPD. It can happen. It should happen. Actually, the Santa Monica retraining became a TEDx program. And that was because of Rand. Rand stepped in and actually helped with it. But there is a training that has to go on to interact with the community at the level of domestic violence, homelessness, mental instability, and of course, you've got the youth interacting that actually can see all this going on. We have youth that have come back to the PAL program to actually work with the youth. This is a good thing. So I do a speech to the seniors as a human trafficking person who works with a group. And I tell them, you have to remember what we put out there. Our kids are the sponges, they take it in. Let's continue to put good stuff out there so that they can take it in.
Thank you, Becky. So far I've heard of at least 4, maybe use of force small group for sure, budget allocations, civilian oversight committee and what that would look like and what their purview would be. There's been kind of talk that I put together around like a joint response team approach, right? Where it's not just police going, but it's no police going and it's something like that. I think that might require a group of people to focus on that as well. And then one thing that comes up all the time, and I don't know if you guys think this needs its own or something else, is training for police. People, 50% of the calls from last week were about training. Tonight, we've talked a lot about different types of training. So I don't know if people want a small group around training too, but that would be 5 small groups that we could break into and start to dig into. Is there anything that anybody thinks needs a greater highlight, or are there things that we want to make sure are like nested into it? I'm seeing police culture. Would that replace training, Julie? So broadly police culture. Okay. Police culture. Okay. And then some other things that have come up just to see if we have groups that would capture all of these things. Just say if there's something that you think isn't captured by the 5 that we said. So like de-escalation strategies and training on all levels of incidents. That's one that I added that to the list. That's one that I'd like to talk about. And I think that could probably go under police culture, right? I have a thing about like the measures of success and the like impact measurement. But I think that could go in all of these, to be honest. So that's something that could get done towards the end. But I think none of these should end without metrics for us to actually track that it's happening down the line. And then the police union discussion, I think that will come up in probably more than one of these. I see Wally's got his hand up for the first time, and did someone else? And Angela, anybody? And Erica. Okay. So, and Darnell. Okay. So Wally, you're first.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Just one thing that wasn't addressed as much, Shuli, you brought it up and it was listed in the spreadsheet, was alternatives to calling 911. And I'd sure like to spend a little bit more time and energy about alternatives that were listed in the policy and program. So that was it. I think that's very important. And from a business standpoint, which is, I think, a little bit one of the many things I bring to this is these relate to commerce in a way. And that's important because it is about tax dollars, it's about revenue, it's about budgets. Thanks.
Thank you. So if I put, because I actually haven't even gotten to connect with these people, but Downtown Santa Monica has actually 2 years ago did a research trip to Minneapolis to learn about they have a joint 911 dispatch with the BIDS, the police department, and nonprofits. So they're all able to plug into the same system. And then nonprofits are able to say, we can go to that call. We have somebody that's nearby. Or if it's just like filing a report or something, the BID officers can do that. And maybe we call the joint response team development and that sort of like alternative approaches or something like that. Because it seems like those would sort of go together. Does that sound right? Okay. Now I forgot who else had their hands up. Angela?
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of circle back. So when we talk about training, for instance, we had also mentioned how the community should definitely be involved in the training as far as, to ensure, right, that they're like, this is what we think implicit bias looks like, or this is what we think microaggression is. Because it changes, right, through the decades, and sometimes it's more subtle than overt, and like, a youth may perceive it as, oh, that was definitely microaggression there, versus how, an older person would perceive it. So I think that the community definitely needs to be involved in understanding what interaction is all about, right, and understanding how what we perceive is like, it's always that tone, when someone starts to get the authoritative tone for us as minorities, that's like, whoa, you know, like we feel it right off when you start going. So it's understanding those little quirks and nuances in that as far as the training and engagement goes, I think. And then also, I think, you know, like when we talked about joint response, I think that's good. And to, I guess, and I think you already mentioned it, make sure that the mental health and all of that was a part of that joint response, right? As that other committee and everything. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Got it. Okay. Erica, Darnell, and Liz.
Sure. So I think that we're doing a lot of these things already, and we don't need to start from scratch on a lot of this. Particularly in the training area, we already do de-escalation training. We do implicit bias training. We also have a cadre on procedural justice and implicit bias. That's some officers that receive additional training related to those things. But I think the thing that we're missing is exactly what Angela was talking about, that those trainings in general are just very general. They're based on evidence-based national ideals and not necessarily, which gives them, again, some legitimacy, but it doesn't necessarily reflect the specifics in Santa Monica. And they don't generally take into account the youth perspective. They're usually just adult responses. And so I think that would be a way that we could absolutely include the community in order to be able to make those really, really crucial training courses much more adept at handling our own community. We also do a lot related to the joint response. So Santa Monica is actually a leader in multidisciplinary teams. It's something that our city, including our Human Services Division, working with the police department, have been able to put a lot of multidisciplinary teams out into the field. DMH calls them MET teams, mental evaluation teams. There's lots of different ways that you can structure them that include police officers, do not include police officers. Some have EMTs, some have physicians, some have nurse practitioners, some have mental health clinicians. Like, there's tons of different ways that you can create those teams to specifically respond to issues in your community. And we've already got the basic structure of those worked out, along with the communication factor. Having joint radios. Our DMH clinicians are on our radios. We communicate directly with our ambassador dispatch. So those are our DTSM ambassadors. They're civilians out in the field doing they have different responsibilities as far as just community relations. So we have a direct contact with them. We also coordinate projects with them. We have monthly meetings with them. We work with county funded teams multidisciplinary teams. So again, a lot of these things, I'm not going to go too deeply into them, but these are all things that we're working on that if they resonate with this group, then could be things that we could prioritize. If there are certain structures that resonate more with the group, then we can prioritize those structures. We're, again, very devoted to this idea that we need to be reflective. And sometimes we're working in a vacuum and just trying to make the best decisions that we can based on what we're seeing and hearing. But this kind of gives us that additional layer of getting more input and making sure that the output is a lot better. And just lastly, I just wanted to, I was kind of just chuckling a little bit to myself about Robbie and that, officers don't want to stand in the line of fire and really hear this stuff. And I get that, but I would just like to point out, I've been taking abuse from Nat all night and I'm still sticking in here with all of you. So, this is really a collaboration. This is our department wanting to work with this committee and get as, as many good decisions with enough, information done in the time that we have. So again, thanks.
Thanks, Erica. Okay, Darnell and Liz, and then it's 8:04, so we should probably wrap up soon.
Well, I mean, actually, Eric, everything that I had in my notes as far as de-escalation and want to talk about our crisis negotiation team, you spoke about everything, so I'm not going to even repeat what you said. You said it perfectly. But what I do want to echo and talk about is something that Robbie and Angela spoke of, as far as police culture, and it really touched me, especially what Robbie said about maybe some people aren't receptive to it or don't want to hear it. But I think it's important. I think we're in a generation now where many of our officers, they're very receptive to it and they do want to understand these things. Or I think we have to meet in the middle when it comes to these things. And I'm going to get super personal with you guys and everyone here, but I understand that I'm a police officer who I've seen things from a different lens. I grew up totally different. I've been to more of my friends' funerals and graduations. So I tell them, the police officers that I ride with, I tell them my stories because there's no way that they can actually understand what I've been through, what people like me have been through, unless you sit down and have these conversations. So I think that officers do need to have these conversations with the community, and the community needs to have the conversation with police as well. So we can really understand, because it wasn't until I became a police officer that I understood policing. And I know some people say, like, policing to me is all about the community. It's not, about just chasing bad guys and all of these arrests. It's also about making the community that you work in feel safe. And I don't think I would have never understood some of these things unless I had became a police officer. And I think we just really need to work on that communication. And I think, Robbie, that's something I'm going to push for. Because I did, when I got hired, I went to the Inkwell and, I went through your presentation. And I think that's something we need to do more of, not just when we first get hired, but, whether it's yearly or whatever the case is. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you. Liz.
To follow up with what Darnell shared, thank you for sharing that. I think it's a couple of comments that I had was, the importance of the neighborhood resource officers and the crime prevention coordinator. I think, if anything, that specific program or this idea of the NRO is having all of our officers know the different beats, know the dynamics, the different aspects of the different communities, particularly the Pico neighborhood, and also knowing that its history, right? Its history of generational trauma that we've experienced throughout the 80s and 90s, the youth that we've lost, to contextualize their work, to contextualize and understand that families are still grieving and still have their sons and daughters incarcerated, and to know that there's still families that are hurting as a result of policing from years ago. And so I think that's important in terms of helping officers, new officers who are coming into our community, to understand and really know the community, and like what you were saying, Darnell, about building community and being creative and thinking outside the box in terms of how that is fostered, so that when we have different beat officers, they're not just officers, but we know their names, where there's kids, like you mentioned earlier about PAL and the officers getting to know the youth. But being intentional goes back to Rasika's point about, having the youth feel safe and comfortable, and that there's a lot of healing that needs to happen there. And another point is also the juvenile diversion program. We haven't heard much about it, but that's also a key program that has just evolved in the last 3 to 4 years. That's very pivotal and a life changer for many of our youth that have the opportunity to not get caught up in the system. And there's an approach to ensure that the students feel heard, are able to restore themselves and the decisions that they've made, and how to, ensure that they move on and have thriving lives and not get caught up with law enforcement. But it takes a collective, it takes community, and it takes a lot of different agencies to help foster that. And I think that's a program that we should definitely be hearing more about, because I know that, again, a lot of what Rasika shared last time and in her emails, there's a lot of tension and feelings behind what youth have experienced. Maybe not in our community, maybe in our community, outside the community, but I think it's also historical, what their parents may have experienced. So I think that's important to also kind of keep in mind as we move forward and think about programming, to Mike's point about where, you know, some of these programs that got cut and how some of those programs can be life-changing in terms of parents' ability to provide a safety net or a sense of community, and much of that is not available anymore due to COVID. So just things to kind of keep in mind as we move forward.
Oh, Rosika?
Sorry, I know we're running out of time. Just really quick. I wanted to just kind of attest to what Liz was saying and give you guys a bit more of a positive note that changes are happening in YRT and with Diversion and the groups that we run. We run a summer group every Wednesday, and one of our youth that he just turned 13, and he actually went through or he's going through the Diversion program with Anna. And I asked them, because again, I'm trying to do as much of this work as I can with my youth already so that we can get kind of an idea. But the question that I asked just in that group this past Monday was, what do you need to feel safe in your community? Or what can the city and Santa Monica PD do to make you feel safer in your community? And there were a couple youth who gave a couple of ideas, but his response stood out because it was the first time that we ever heard a youth say, "What are you talking about? I feel perfectly safe." And it's because of the fact that his experience is so completely different than youth my age or youth that are a couple years older than him. He got into some trouble where his life at 12 years old could have been completely just gone in a different direction. But because of the programs that we have in our community, like Diversion, you know, instead of, you know, throwing him away, letting him slip through the cracks, he was kind of like held, and he was kept away from that. And through the programs, you know, through the response that he got from the community, from PD, from Diversion, and all the support that he had, you know, he felt safe. He feels safe. He doesn't fear what's going to happen to him if he makes a mistake. He's able to rely on the support that he has through these programs that are already kind of in place to help that situation. And then just another quick positive thing, what Darnell was talking about, how there needs to be like communication of like stories between, you know, the police and the community, like we've all been saying. Some of those conversations have actually already started to happen. Anahata, again, she's amazing, has been doing this work for a few weeks now. She's actually been coordinating, we call them, I think we just call them lunches. We've just been having lunches via Zoom with police officers. So some youth in our community each week will have an honest, open, human-to-human conversation with officers, detectives of all different sorts in PD. And in fact, I think that's one of the first times that I met, you know, Erica outside of this committee was that lunch. I got to have real, honest human interaction and human connection with officers that are being vulnerable. And yes, the conversations are sometimes uncomfortable, and you know, there are officers that go, whoa, I didn't do that. But these conversations are being had, and I feel like if we could just hold on to that and like nurture it and allow it to grow from the youth to the community and have it be long-term, so that there's more of a human connection and more of human interaction between the community and PD, it would unify our community, because I feel like that's a lot of the work that we're trying to do. So I just wanted to say that it's happening. It's slowly but surely happening. And I feel like through our committee and the things that we are choosing to do and the decisions that we're making, it's gonna be really beautiful.
What a great way to end. Thank you so much for that. You know, one of the things that I think about with Santa Monica, because I know, you know, I know officers are like, we're not Minneapolis, like it didn't happen here. But I think what's good about that is like it didn't happen here, and we do have some good things to build on. And so even when I'm hearing that it's like difficult to shift around money from one department to another, doesn't mean we can't shift around money in the same department, right? Like we need more money to stuff like that. Like the good things that we're doing, let's like increase that pot then and decrease some of the other things. So I think we have things to work with here, which I think is great. You are all about to get a sign-up sheet email from me as soon as I click off this Zoom for small groups. I'm trying to say everybody sign up for no more than 3 so that they stay small, because I know I'm going to see the list and be like, yes. But if we can get some small groups and then we'll keep meeting here every Wednesday and check in with each other, I think that will be a good process for us to start moving it forward. And then tomorrow I'll send all the notes that I took on paper. I don't know why I didn't get a computer. I'll send all these notes out, and there'll be some more follow-ups because there's people that we want to set up calls with, and I will set up some of them, but some of them you all should be setting up. So I just wanted to send that all out to everybody, and then like let's get into it.
Great.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Night.
Bye, guys.
Good night. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.